The cryopod glowed with an eerie blue luminescence in the dim amber light of the Xerion research vessel. It was an anomaly, an ancient relic drifting in the void, its surface pitted by micrometeorite impacts, its power core still humming faintly after centuries of isolation. The Xerion scientists had found it adrift near the edge of a dead system, a forgotten piece of history encased in ice and silence. Commander Xerwind observed the pod with a mixture of scientific curiosity and instinctive unease. His emerald-hued skin rippled with subtle bioluminescent patterns, betraying his tension. The pod was human, a species the Xerion Collective had long dismissed as primitive, emotional, and ultimately irrelevant in the grand calculus of galactic power. Yet here it was, preserved with unsettling precision, a relic from an era when humanity had barely clawed its way into the stars. "Proceed with extraction," Xerwind commanded, his voice a low, resonant hum. Arsec, the lead xenobiologist, extended a cluster of delicate tendrils from his wrist apparatus, interfacing with the pod's archaic systems. The Xerion's technology was a fusion of organic and mechanical, living circuitry pulsing with photosynthetic energy, vines of biometal weaving through the ship's architecture like veins. The pod systems resisted at first, its protocols locked behind layers of encryption, but Arsec's neural symbiotes adapted, unraveling the code strand by strand. A hiss of escaping cryogenic gas filled the chamber as the pod seals disengaged. Frost curled away in wisps, revealing the figure inside. A human male, clad in a blackened combat exosuit, its plating scarred from battles lost to time. His face was pale, almost corpse-like, but the slow, deliberate rise of his chest confirmed life. Arsec's tendrils retracted in surprise. "His vitals are stable. More than stable, his cellular regeneration is accelerated." Xerwind's spines flexed. That should have been impossible. Stasis was meant to preserve, not enhance. Yet the readings flickering across the bioscanning array were undeniable. The human's musculature was denser than baseline, his neural activity flickering with hyper-efficient synaptic responses. Then the human's eyes opened. Dark pupil, less at first, then dilating rapidly as they adjusted to the light. There was no disorientation, no groggy awakening, just an immediate, terrifying awareness. His gaze locked onto Xerwind, and the commander felt something primal twist in his gut. It was the look of a predator assessing prey. The human sat up in one fluid motion, his exosuit whirring softly as servos compensated for centuries of stillness. His voice, when he spoke, was a rasp of controlled violence. "Where am I?" Arsec flinched. The human's words were in their language, flawlessly pronounced, as if he had been studying it for years. But that was impossible. Unless Xerwind realized the truth a second too late. The human's neural scans hadn't just shown heightened reflexes. They had shown adaptation. His brain had been rewriting itself in stasis, optimizing, learning, and now he was awake, and he was hungry. The Xerion command chamber pulsed with uneasy light, the yellow-green luminescence flickering as if sensing the tension in the air. Xerwind's frilled crest stiffened along his spine, a subconscious reaction to danger, one he had not felt in decades. Before him, the human stood, not with the sluggish disorientation of a creature pulled from cryo-sleep, but with the poised readiness of a soldier who had never stopped fighting. The human Captain Cameron Dex, according to the fragmented data logs, tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes scanning the room with methodical precision. Every movement was economical, devoid of wasted energy. His exosuit, a relic of pre-collapse human warfare, hummed faintly as its systems recalibrated, the servos adjusting to his weight with eerie smoothness. It should have been obsolete. Instead, it looked alive. Arsec's tendrils twitched nervously as he reviewed the neural scans again. The human brain was supposed to degrade in prolonged stasis, synapses collapsing into entropy. But Dex's mind had done the opposite. It had optimized. Neural pathways had rewired themselves, pruning inefficiencies, reinforcing survival instincts. The scans showed synaptic activity akin to a combat. Ready soldier. No, beyond that. His reflexes were too fast, his processing too sharp. And then there was the language. Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second. A Xerion instinct to shield against threat. The human had spoken in their tongue. Not just words, phrasing, intonation, the subtle harmonics of native fluency. Impossible, unless he learned it from our systems while he slept. The realization sent a cold ripple through Xerwind's circulatory network. The human's brain hadn't just adapted, it had scavenged. Dex exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the air for the briefest moment before his suit's climate regulators compensated. His gaze settled on Xerwind, and the commander felt the weight of it. Not just observation, but assessment. Calculating, measuring. "Where are my people?" Dex asked, his voice low, controlled. Ursic hesitated, his bioluminescent markings dimming slightly, a telltale sign of distress. "You are the only survivor," he admitted. The human didn't react. No flinch, no snarl, only a fractional tightening around his eyes, a micro-expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Xerwind had studied human facial cues before. That was anger, not explosive, not volatile. Cold Dex flexed his fingers, the exosuits, gauntlets whirring as the actuators tested their range. "How long?" 412 cycles, Ursic supplied. Again, no visible reaction, but Xerwind noticed the way Dex's pulse didn't spike. The way his breathing remained steady. Most species, when faced with the obliteration of their civilization, would have shattered. Humans, it seemed, condensed. Then Dex moved, not toward them, not in attack. He simply turned, stepping toward the observation panel, where the void of space stretched beyond, dotted with the distant glimmer of Xerion bio. Ships, his reflection glowed faintly in the organic glass, a specter from a dead era. "You woke me to study me," he said. It wasn't a question. Xerwind's frills tightened. "We sought to understand." Dex's lips curled, not a smile, not a sneer, something far more unsettling, amusement. "And now you do." A silence stretched, thick with unspoken implications. Then the alarms blared. The chamber's bioluminescence flared crimson as the ship's defense protocols activated. Ursic's tendrils lashed in panic as data streamed across the organic displays. Brache detected Dex 7, something's inside. Xerwind whirled toward Dex, instinct screaming that this was no coincidence. But the human hadn't moved. He stood perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold with detached interest. Then, softly, he said, "You should have left me frozen." Outside, something screeched against the hull, and the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the chamber whole. For 3 heartbeats, there was nothing but the rasp of breath and the distant, guttural shriek of metal parting under claws. Then the emergency biolights flickered on, bathing the room in a sickly amber glow. The shadows they cast writhed like living things, twisting across the walls in jagged, unnatural patterns. Xerwind's frills flared wide, his pupils dilating to absorb every shred of light. His species had evolved beneath the triple suns of Xerion Prime. Darkness was an alien terror, a primal unease buried deep in their genetic memory. But this was worse than mere absence of light. This darkness pressed against him, thick with the scent of ionized air and something else. Something metallic, coppery. Blood, Ursic's tendrils coiled tight around his data tablet. The organic screen pulsing frantic diagnostics. "Life support stable," he hissed, voice thin with forced calm. "But the outer hull, Deck 7, is compromised. The security drones aren't responding." Xerwind didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the human. Dex hadn't so much as twitched. He stood motionless in the center of the room, head slightly tilted, as if listening to a frequency none of them could hear. The emergency lights carved harsh angles across his face, turning his scars into grotesque trenches. His eyes, those damned eyes, gleamed with a reflection that shouldn't have been possible. Like a predator's in the dead of night. Then, without warning, he moved. It wasn't the sluggish stumble of a cryo-thawed relic. It wasn't even the controlled precision of a soldier. It was something else. A motion so fluid, so unnaturally efficient, that Xerwind's hindbrain screamed at him to run. Dex crossed the chamber in 3 strides, his bare feet silent against the spongy organic flooring. He stopped inches from the observation window, his breath fogging the glass as he peered into the void beyond. Ursek made a choked sound. What is he? Dex's voice was a low rumble, more vibration than words. You really don't know what's out there, do you? Xerwind's frills flattened. Explain. The human didn't turn. Your scans, your sensors. They didn't pick it up when you dragged my pod aboard. His fingers brushed the glass, leaving faint smudges. It hitchhiked. Ursek's tendrils stiffened. That's impossible. Our biosensors would have detected any foreign. A deafening crunch reverberated through the ship. The floor lurched violently, throwing Xerwind into the wall. Alarms wailed as the chamber's biomechanical supports groaned in protest. Somewhere in the distance, a chorus of screams echoed, then cut off abruptly. Dex remained standing, unshaken, unmoved. When he finally turned to face them, his expression was almost pitying. You think you're the first species to dig up something you shouldn't have? The lights flickered again. In the strobing darkness, something vast and multi-limbed shifted beyond the window. A silhouette of jagged edges and too many joints, pressed against the glass for the briefest instant before vanishing. Ursek made a sound no Xerion throat should have been capable of producing. Dex exhaled, long and slow. Yeah, he murmured. That's what I thought. Then the door exploded inward, and the real screaming began. The ship screamed. Not in the way of living things. No biological throat could produce such a sound. This was the shriek of tearing metal, of organic support beams snapping like overstressed tendons, of the Xerion vessels, very architecture convulsing in agony. The air tasted of burning amber resin and spilled bioluminescence. The yellow-green glow of the corridors now flickering like a dying star. Xerwind clawed his way upright, his carapace throbbing where it had struck the wall. His secondary eyes, sensitive to motion, darted across the chaos. Crew members scrambling, their emerald skin flushed with panic, their bioluminescent markings flaring erratic distress signals. And then there was him. Captain Cameron Dex stood untouched in the center of the maelstrom, his boots planted as if the ship's violent tremors were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those unnerving, depthless human eyes, tracked the shadows beyond the shattered door with something between resignation and grim amusement. Ursek was the first to speak, his voice a strangled warble. What is that? Dex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached down slow, deliberate, and picked up a fallen sidearm from a Xerion security officer who would never need it again. The weapon was alien in his grip, its smooth vine, like contours clashing with the brutal efficiency of human design. Yet he handled it like Head used it 1,000 times before. You ever hear of the Acheron? He asked, thumbing the weapon's activation node with unsettling familiarity. Xerwind's frills flattened against his skull. The name meant nothing to him, but the way Dex said it, like it was a curse, a warning, a tombstone, sent a primal chill through his exoskeleton. Before he could demand an explanation, the lights died entirely. For 3 heartbeats, there was only darkness and the ragged breathing of terrified Xerions. Then, the emergency bioluminescence flickered back on, casting the corridor in a sickly, pulsing green, and the thing from beyond the door moved. It was wrong, not just in shape, though that alone was enough to make Xerwind's secondary stomachs clench, but in motion, its limbs bent where no limbs should bend, its silhouette shifting between solid and smoke, as if reality itself struggled to contain it. It made no sound. No footsteps. No breath. Just the occasional wet, organic click of something unseen adjusting. Ursic made a noise like a dying insect. Dex exhaled through his nose. "Yeah," he muttered, raising the stolen weapon. "That's about what I expected." The creature lunged. The shot wasn't perfect. The Xerion weapon's plasma discharge was slower than human kinetics, but it struck true, shearing through the thing's distended torso in a burst of sizzling yellow-green energy. The creature recoiled, its form shuddering like a disturbed reflection in water. For a single fragile moment, Xerwind dared to hope. Then the wound sealed, not healed, not knitted back together. It simply ceased to exist. The edges of the injury blurring and reforming, as if time itself had stuttered backward. Dex didn't hesitate. He grabbed Xerwind by the arm, his grip like durasteel, and hauled him backward. "Run," he said, and for the first time in his life, Xerwind, High Commander of the Xerion 7th Fleet, obeyed a human without question. Behind them, the ship continued to scream. Section Fae. The nebula stares back. The corridors of the Xerathal had never felt so suffocating. Xerwind's pulse thrummed in his throat, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically as he sprinted beside the human. The walls, once alive with the soft glow of photosynthetic energy webs, now flickered like a dying star, corrupted, unstable. Behind them, the thing moved without sound, its presence a cold pressure against the back of Xerwind's neck. Dex moved like a predator, not the elegant, calculated lethality of Xerion hunters, but something raw. Every motion was efficiency stripped to its bones. Shoulder checking a sealed bulkhead instead of waiting for the biolock. Using the stolen plasma caster one, handed like it weighed nothing. His breathing was steady. That was what unsettled Xerwind most. The human wasn't afraid. Ursic's voice crackled through the comms, distorted by interference. "High Commander, portside hangar. Sealed systems failing." Dex didn't wait for translation. He pivoted mid-stride, boots screeching against the organic metal, and yanked Xerwind into a side passage. The walls here were darker, the bioluminescence choked by creeping tendrils of black ichor. The air smelled like rust and spoiled nectar. Xerwind's mandibles twitched. "This leads to the lower decks." "Well, be trapped." Dex didn't slow. "Your ship's bleeding out. Only place left to go is down." A shudder rocked the Xerathal, nearly sending Xerwind to his knees. The deck plating groaned, a sound no living vessel should ever make. Dex caught him by the forearm, his grip crushing, and hauled him forward. The human's eyes were flat in the dim light. No fear, no hesitation, just a cold, calculating focus that made Xerwind's spine tighten. They rounded a corner and froze. The corridor ahead was wrong. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat, veins of black corruption spreading through the amber-hued metal. The floor had softened, sagging into a shallow basin filled with something thick and iridescent. And at the center, or what was left of him, the scientist was suspended in the viscous pool, his body half submerged, his emerald carapace split open like overripe fruit. His bioluminescence had dimmed to a sickly flicker, his limbs twitching in slow, arrhythmic spasms. His face. Xerwind's breath caught. Ursic's face was untouched. His eyes were wide, aware. Dex's finger tightened on the plasma caster. "Don't." Xerwind barely heard him. He took a step forward. "Ursic." The scientist's mouth opened. What came out wasn't speech. It was a sound, a wet, shuddering vibration that resonated in Xerwind's bones. The walls answered. The corruption rippled, tendrils unspooling toward them with languid hunger. The plasma bolt struck Ursic's chest, or where his chest had been. The impact sent cracks, spiderwebbing through his body, light bleeding from the fractures. For a heartbeat, Xerwind saw something else inside the hollowed out shell, a nest of writhing filaments, a pupil, less eye staring back from the dark. Then Arsik burst. The explosion wasn't fire or shrapnel. It was pressure, a concussive wave of wrongness that sent Xerwind crashing to his knees. His vision swam, his inner ears shrieking as reality itself seemed to flex around him. Dex grabbed him again. Move. Behind them, the corridor collapsed in on itself, the walls folding like wet parchment. The air tasted like copper and ozone. Xerwind's thoughts were a fractured mess. Ursik was alive. Ursik was gone. The ship is eating itself. But Dex's grip was an anchor, dragging him forward through the nightmare. The human didn't look back, not once. And that, more than anything, told Xerwind the truth. They weren't escaping. They were being herded. Section Fey. The calculus of mercy. The ship groaned around them, a sound like the death rattle of some vast wounded beast. The corridors had become a living nightmare, the once pristine biomechanical walls now twisting in unnatural spasms. Amber veins of photosynthetic energy flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that seemed to reach for them as they ran. Xerwind's lungs burned. His limbs felt leaden, his thoughts sluggish with shock. Ursik was gone, not dead, unmade. The memory of it pulsed behind his eyes, the way his second, in command had come apart, not in blood or viscera, but in concepts. Reality itself had peeled back, revealing something beneath the surface of the ship, something hungry. And Dex hadn't hesitated. The human moved like a predator, his strides measured, his breathing controlled, despite the weight of Xerwind half dragged beside him. His grip was iron, unrelenting. There was no panic in him, only calculation. They're not like us. The realization struck Xerwind with the force of a plasma round. Humans didn't freeze in the face of the unknown. They didn't falter when the universe unraveled. They adapted, and that adaptation was written in the lines of Dex's body, the way his muscles coiled, the way his eyes scanned every shuddering corridor, every flicker of dying light. Ahead, the path forked, the left passage pulsed with the sickly yellow-green of failing bioluminescence. The right was dark, its organic archway collapsed inward, strangled by thick, fibrous growths that twitched as if sensing their approach. Dex didn't slow. He wrenched Xerwind to the left. No. Xerwind choked out, his voice raw. That leads to the core. The energy signatures. If the containment fails, Dex's answer was a single, clipped word. Exactly. Then Xerwind understood. The human wasn't running blindly. He was hunting. The core chamber was a cathedral of ruin. What had once been the heart of the Xerion vessel, a vast, pulsating orb of photosynthetic energy, cradled in a lattice of living metal, now lay broken. The orb was cracked, its luminous yellow-green essence bleeding out in viscous strands that writhed across the floor, seeking purchase. The air hummed with unstable power, the scent of ozone thick enough to taste, and in the center of it all, Anderson. She stood with her back to them, her armored silhouette haloed by the dying light. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if the ship's death throes were nothing more than background noise. Dex released Xerwind, stepping forward. Major Anderson didn't turn. Took you long enough. Xerwind's breath caught. This was the human commander, the one they had pulled from cryo, the relic from a forgotten war. She should have been weak, disoriented. Instead, she radiated control. Her armor, ancient by galactic standards, was a patchwork of scars and modifications, the original plating reinforced with layers of scavenged tech. The helmet was off, revealing a face that was all sharp angles and cold precision. Her hair, cropped short, was more silver than brown. And her eyes were the worst part. They were old, not in the way of Xerion elders, whose years were marked in the slow fade of bioluminescence. No, Anderson's gaze carried the weight of something darker, something that had stared into the abyss and recognized it. She finally turned. her attention settling on Xerwind. "You're the one in charge." He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The sheer presence of her pinned him in place. Anderson's lips curled, not a smile, a predator's baring of teeth. "Good, then you'll understand when I say this isn't personal." She raised a hand, the core screamed. Energy arced from the fractured orb, lashing out in jagged tendrils. Not toward her, but through her. The light wrapped around her arm, her torso, her bones, as if she were a conduit, a living grounding rod for the ship's death throes. Xerwind's mind fractured. She wasn't just surviving the collapse, she was harnessing it. Deck's voice cut through the chaos. "We need to go now." Anderson didn't argue. She stepped back, the energy unraveling from her limbs, like serpents retreating to their den. The core pulsed once, weakly, then imploded. The shockwave hit like a hammer. Xerwind was airborne for a heartbeat. Then Dex caught him again, shoving him toward the exit. Behind them, the chamber folded inward, the walls collapsing like a lung, exhaling its last breath. And as the ship died around them, Xerwind realized the truth. The humans hadn't just outmaneuvered them. They had chosen mercy. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The escape pod shuddered as it tore free from the dying Xerion warship, its organic hull fracturing behind them in silent emerald-tinged ruin. Xerwind pressed his four-fingered hands against the pod's translucent membrane, watching as the vessel that had once been the pride of his fleet collapsed into itself, its photosynthetic energy webs flickering out like drowned fireflies. He had expected death. Instead, he had been given a choice. And the humans had chosen mercy. The pod's interior was cramped, the air thick with the scent of human sweat and the acrid tang of burnt biocircuitry. Major Anderson sat across from him, her armored fingers flexing around the grip of her sidearm, not threatening but aware. Dex stood near the pod's controls, his posture coiled, his eyes scanning the readouts with the precision of a predator tracking prey. Ursik, the scientist, was the only one who dared speak. "You should have let us die." His voice was a whisper, the bioluminescent patterns along his throat, dim with shame. Anderson didn't look at him. "Would you have?" Xerwind knew the answer. The Xerion Dominion had never hesitated to purge weaker species, to burn worlds that resisted assimilation. Mercy was a luxury they could not afford. The humans had afforded it anyway. Dex exhaled sharply, his gaze flicking to Anderson. "We've got a problem." She didn't need to ask. The pod sensors painted the truth in cold, unflinching data. The Xerion fleet had regrouped. Their living warships pulsing with renewed energy, their weaponized tendrils coiling for a final strike. They would not allow this humiliation to stand. Anderson leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Xerwind's. "You're coming with us." It wasn't a request. Xerwind felt the weight of the unspoken truth between them. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was proof. Proof that humanity could do what the Xerion could not. The pod jolted as the first volley of plasma streaked past, the emerald energy casting eerie shadows across their faces. Deck's fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power. But the pod wasn't built for evasion. It was built for survival. Anderson reached into a compartment at her hip and withdrew a small, unmarked vial. Inside, a single drop of silver liquid swirled, alive with nanoscopic motion. Xerwind's breath caught. He had seen human technology before, brutal, efficient, relentless. But this was something else. Ursik recoiled. "What is that?" Anderson didn't answer. Instead, she pressed the vial into Xerwind's palm. The pod shuddered again, a near miss rocking its frame. The Xerion fleet was closing in. Xerwind stared at the vial, his mind racing. This wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a threat. It was trust. And that, more than any plasma lance or railgun, was what terrified him. Because if humanity could offer mercy, what else were they capable of? The pod's engines flared as Dex punched the thrusters, hurling them toward the waiting human fleet. Behind them, the Xerion warships loomed, their organic hulls gleaming like emerald teeth in the void. But Xerwind didn't look back. He clutched the vial tighter. And for the first time in his life, the Xerion high chamber pulsed with uneasy light. Bioluminescent veins threaded through the walls, their yellow-green glow flickering in time with the murmurs of the assembled elders. The air smelled of ozone and something deeper. The musk of living metal, the faint tang of photosynthetic energy webs humming beneath the floor. Xerwind stood at the center of it all, the weight of the human vial heavy in his grasp. He had expected outrage, disbelief, perhaps even violence. Instead, the elders regarded him with something far worse. Pity. Xerwind. Elder Vosk intoned, his voice a slow, organic rumble like roots shifting beneath soil. You speak of mercy from the Deathworlders. You hold their gift as though it were sacred. His emerald crest flexed, the spines along his neck stiffening. But tell me, did they not slaughter 3 of our scout fleets at Proxima Centauri? Did they not burn the fixed colonies to ash? Xerwind's grip tightened around the vial. He could feel the liquid inside shifting, alive in ways Xerion science could not yet parse. They did, he admitted, but not without cause. A ripple of derision passed through the chamber. The elders exchanged glances, their bioluminescent markings dimming in disapproval. You have been compromised, Elder Cyril hissed, her vine, like fingers curling around the armrests of her throne. The humans have infected your mind. Their violence is legendary, their ruthlessness unmatched, and yet you stand before us speaking of trust. Xerwind exhaled slowly. He had known this would be difficult. The Xerion Collective had spent centuries perfecting their doctrine of control, of measured logical expansion. Humanity was chaos incarnate, a species that clawed its way from the mud of a death world and thrived in the crucible of war. They could have killed me, Xerwind said, his voice low but steady. They could have destroyed my ship, my crew. Instead, they spared us. They gave us this. He lifted the vial, the silver liquid catching the chamber's light, swirling with unseen purpose. Ursek, standing at the edge of the chamber, shifted uneasily. His scientific curiosity warred with ingrained caution. The substance is, unlike anything in our archives, its molecular structure is fluid, adaptive. It responds to intent. Elder Vosk leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the floor. And what intent do you believe the humans harbor, Xerwind, after all they have done? Xerwind met his gaze. Survival, he said simply. Nothing more, nothing less. The chamber fell silent, then laughter. It started with Elder Cyril, a dry, rustling sound, like leaves in a dying wind. Soon, the others joined, their amusement pulsing through the bioluminescent veins of the chamber. You are naive, Vosk finally said, his voice thick with disdain. The humans are beasts, clever, yes, dangerous, certainly. But beasts nonetheless. They do not gift, they do not spare, they consume. Xerwind felt his crest flatten against his skull. He had seen the way Anderson looked at him, not with the cold calculation of a predator, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition, understanding, Dex, who had stood between him and his own execution, who had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. You are wrong, Xerwind said softly. The laughter died. Vosk's eyes darkened, the yellow-green glow within them dimming to a smolder. Then prove it. He gestured to the vial. If this is truly a gift, and not some weapon in disguise, use it. Ursek stiffened. Elder, we have not yet. Xerwind hesitated. The humans had not explained what the liquid did, only that it was a gesture of peace. But peace, he was beginning to understand, was a language the Xerion elders had long forgotten. He uncapped the vial. The chamber erupted. Elders surged to their feet, their bioluminescent markings flaring in alarm. Ursek let out a choked sound, his datapad clattering to the floor. For a moment, nothing. It raced through Xerwind's veins, not pain, but awakening. His vision sharpened, colors resolving into spectra he had never seen before. The chamber's energy webs pulsed in his sight, their flows suddenly clear, their weaknesses laid bare. His muscles thrummed with new strength, his mind expanding, adapting. And then, as quickly as it had come, the sensation faded, leaving only clarity. He looked down at his hands. His scales shimmered, faintly iridescent, as though kissed by starlight. The elders stared. "What are you?" Cyril whispered. Xerwind flexed his fingers, feeling the hum of the chamber's energy webs, as though they were his own. "I am what they offered," he said, and for the first time, the elders looked at him not with pity. Section Fey, the ultimatum. The chamber pulsed with uneasy energy, the organic walls throbbing in time with the Xerion's racing heartbeats. The elders had retreated to the far side of the room, their bioluminescent markings flickering in erratic bursts. Fear made visible. Only Cyril remained close. His emerald gaze locked onto Xerwind with something between awe and terror. Xerwind exhaled, watching his breath mist in the cold air. His body still hummed with the remnants of the human serum's power, his senses sharper, his thoughts unnervingly clear. The chamber's energy webs, once indecipherable, now whispered their secrets to him. He could feel the ship, its pulse, its rhythm, as though it were an extension of himself. Ursek was the first to break the silence. The scientist's voice trembled, his frilled neck, spines flattened tight against his skull. This shouldn't be possible. The human physiology is too volatile, too unstable. Their enhancements should have torn you apart. Xerwind flexed his hands again, watching the way the light caught on his newly iridescent scales. "And yet," he murmured, "here I stand." The elders exchanged glances, their fear a living thing between them. Then the alarms blared. The chamber's organic walls flared crimson, the ship's warning systems shrieking through the neural-linked comms. Xerwind didn't need the data, feeds to know what was happening. He could feel it. The humans had not waited for diplomacy. A holographic projection flickered to life above the central node, revealing the void outside. The human warships, their warships, had moved, not in retreat. In formation, the Indomitable loomed at the forefront, its monstrous hull bristling with weapons, its engines burning cold blue against the dark. And beside it, smaller but no less deadly, the Vanguard, Major Anderson's ship. A transmission crackled through. The face that filled the screen was not Anderson's. It was Captain Dex. His expression was calm, empty, the kind of calm that came not from peace, but from the absolute certainty of violence. "Xerion High Command," he said, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. "You have 1 hour to surrender. Release our people, stand down your fleets, or we will demonstrate why humanity has never needed your approval to survive." The transmission cut, then chaos. The elders erupted into frantic debate, their voices overlapping, their fears spiking the air with the acrid tang of stress. Pheromones. Only Cyril remained still, his gaze locked onto Xerwind. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew they would do this." Xerwind said nothing, because he had known the humans had not come to negotiate. They had come to win, and as the ship's systems screamed of incoming weapon locks, as the elders scrambled for solutions that did not exist, Xerwind did the only thing left to him. He reached out and pulled on the energy webs. The chamber's lights dimmed, the ship shuddered, and for the first time in Xerion history, a human transmission was answered. Not by a commander, not by a soldier, but by a brother. "Captain Dex," Xerwind said, his voice steady, his mind alight with borrowed human fire. "Stand by." He turned to the elders and showed them what mercy looked like when it came from the jaws of war. The chamber pulsed with the dimming glow of Xerion bioluminescence, the organic veins of the ship's walls flickering like a dying heartbeat. Xerwind stood at the center of it all, his body rigid, his mind ablaze with borrowed human fire. The elders had fallen silent, their emerald frills pressed flat against their skulls in instinctive submission. They had never seen one of their own wield power like this, not with such certainty. And yet, Xerwind was no longer just one of theirs. He had touched the human transmission. He had understood it. The energy webs thrummed beneath his fingertips, their photosynthetic currents responding to his will with an eagerness that bordered on reverence. The ship systems, once screaming in alarm, now whispered in anticipation. "Stand by," he had said, and the humans had listened, not because they feared him, but because they recognized the echo of their own resolve in his voice. Ursik was the first to move, his bioluminescent markings flaring in erratic bursts of lime and amber. His claws twitched toward the holographic displays, where the human warships hung motionless in the void. Their weapon systems primed but not yet firing. "They're waiting," he murmured, his voice thin with disbelief. Xerwind exhaled, feeling the weight of centuries of Xerion caution pressing against his ribs. Of course they're waiting. Humans did not destroy when they could win. And winning, he had learned, was not always about annihilation. Sometimes, it was about the scars left behind. The transmission crackled back to life. Captain Deck's voice was calm, almost conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than the fate of two species. "Xerwind," he said, "you've got our attention." Ursik flinched at the casual use of the commander's name. Such familiarity was unthinkable among the Xerion, a breach of hierarchy, a disrespect. But Xerwind only tilted his head, his frills lifting slightly. "You gave me no other choice," he replied. A chuckle, low and rough, filtered through the calm. "Yeah, we're good at that." Then, a new voice, Major Anderson's, cool and precise. "You've opened a channel. Now what?" Xerwind turned to the elders. Their fear was palpable, their bioluminescence dim to near, invisibility in the gloom. They had spent lifetimes believing themselves the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of organic technology, the architects of a civilization too advanced for violence. And now they stood in the shadow of a species that had chosen mercy over massacre. Xerwind flexed his claws, feeling the energy web's pulse in response. "Now," he said, "you learn what it means to be spared." The humans did not lower their weapons. They did not need to. Their silence was weapon enough. Ursik's gaze darted between the holograms and Xerwind, his mind racing. "They could have destroyed us," he whispered. "Why didn't they?" Xerwind closed his eyes. He remembered the human records he had studied, their wars, their sacrifices, their relentless drive to survive against impossible odds. And he understood. "Because," he said softly, "they know what it's like to be hunted." The elders shuddered, and for the first time in Xerion history, they were afraid not of death, but of grace. The ship's systems hummed back to full power, the bioluminescent veins brightening once more. Outside, the human fleet held position, their hulls gleaming like knives in the dark. Xerwind straightened, his frills flaring in defiance of the old ways. "We will answer them," he declared. "Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as something new, something better." And as the energy web surged beneath his touch, he knew the galaxy would never be the same. The Xerion flagship Emerald Dawn drifted through the void, its bioluminescent veins pulsing in slow, rhythmic waves, like the heartbeat of some vast, slumbering beast. The war was over. The battle had never truly begun. And yet, everything had changed. Xerwind stood at the observation deck, his emerald scales catching the ambient glow of the ship's photosynthetic energy webs. The human fleet still loomed beyond the viewport, their warships motionless, their weapons silent. They did not gloat. They did not demand surrender. They simply waited. Ursik approached, his frills twitching in unease. "The elders are unsettled," he murmured. Xerwind did not turn. "They should be." The scientist hesitated, his claws flexing against the organic metal of the deck. They do not understand why the humans spared us. It defies logic. Xerwind exhaled, his breath stirring the faint mist of the chamber's atmospheric regulators. No, it defies them. The elders had ruled the Xerion for centuries. Their wisdom unchallenged, their dominance absolute. They had built an empire on the bones of lesser species, believing themselves the pinnacle of evolution. And now, in the span of a single battle, they had been humbled. Not by force, but by choice. Ursek's voice was barely audible. What do we do now? Xerwind watched as the human flagship, Indomitable, their records called it, activated its docking protocols. A single shuttle detached, gliding toward them like a blade cutting through silk. They are coming, Xerwind said, and he knew, with a certainty that burned in his veins, that this was not an invasion. It was an invitation. Major Catherine Anderson stepped onto the Emerald Dawn, her boots clicking against the living metal of the deck. The air smelled of chlorophyll and ozone, thick with the scent of alien biology. The Xerion crew watched her, their frills flickering in patterns she could not decipher. Fear, respect. She didn't care. Behind her, Captain Cameron Dex moved with the quiet lethality of a predator, his gaze sweeping the chamber. The Xerion flinched when his eyes passed over them. Let them remember. Xerwind approached, his posture rigid, his frills flared in the Xerion equivalent of a salute. Major Anderson, he said, the translator rendering his voice smooth, almost human. She nodded once. Commander. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Then Xerwind did something no Xerion had ever done before. Not the shallow tilt of a superior acknowledging an inferior. A deep, deliberate gesture of submission. Anderson's lips twitched. Stand up, Commander. We're not here to conquer you. Xerwind straightened, his yellow-green eyes gleaming. Then why are you here? She smiled. It was not a kind expression. To offer you a choice. The elders listened in horror as Anderson laid out the terms. No subjugation, no tribute. The galaxy was vast, she explained, filled with threats even the Xerion had never faced. The humans had survived 1,000 apocalypses, clawed their way from the dirt of a death world, and forged themselves into something more. And now, they were offering the same chance to the Xerion. Not as slaves, not as enemies, but as allies. The elders recoiled, their frills vibrating in outrage. You expect us to abandon our ways, to kneel before you? Anderson didn't flinch. I expect you to evolve. And then, for the first time in living memory, Xerwind spoke against the elders. His voice was quiet, the chamber stilled. We have ruled through fear, he said. And today, we learned what true strength looks like. He turned to Anderson. We accept. The elders hissed, their claws unsheathing. But the crew did not move to support them. The balance had shifted, the garden was growing, and the galaxy would burn. Outside, the human fleet powered up their drives, their engines flaring like newborn stars. The Xerion watched, and for the first time in their history, they hoped. The Xerion archives were vast, carved into the living bedrock of their homeworld. The chambers pulsed with the slow, rhythmic glow of photosynthetic data crystals, their amber light flickering like embers in a dying fire. The walls themselves were alive, veined with bioluminescent tendrils that carried information in bursts of chemical code, a library grown rather than built. Arsek moved through the cavernous halls, his clawed fingers trailing along the organic data stacks. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and damp growth, the hum of ancient knowledge vibrating through the soles of his feet. He had come here seeking answers. The war was over. The alliance was forged, and yet he could not shake the question. What are they? The humans had defied every expectation. Their bodies were fragile, their lifespans laughably short, and yet they had stood against the Xerion Imperium and won. Not through brute force, but through something far more terrifying. Adaptation. Ursek paused before a sealed vault, its surface etched with warnings in the old tongue. The elders had forbidden access to these records, deeming them irrelevant, a relic of a dead era. But the elders were gone now. He pressed his palm to the biolock, and the vault exhaled open. Inside, the air was stale, the light dim. The archives here were ancient, their crystalline structures dulled with age, and yet one pod still glowed, a single pulsing data core, its light a deep, venomous green. Ursek reached for it. The moment his fingers made contact, the core reacted, tendrils of living code latching onto his neural interface. Information flooded his mind in a dizzying rush: images, sounds, sensations, and then he saw a battlefield. Not the clean, calculated warfare of the Xerion, not the ordered ranks and surgical strikes of a species that had mastered war as an art form. This was chaos. Smoke choked the air. The ground was churned to mud, littered with broken machines and broken bodies. The sky burned, and in the center of it all, they moved like predators, their movements sharp, desperate. They fought not with the cold precision of soldiers, but with the raw animal fury of creatures who knew nothing but survival. One figure stood out, a warrior clad in battered armor, his face streaked with blood and grime. He was wounded. Ursek could see the dark stains spreading across his side, and yet he did not fall. He laughed, a sound that sent a primal shiver down Ursek's spine. The warrior raised his weapon, a crude, brutal thing, all jagged edges and scorched metal, and charged. The enemy broke before him. Ursek staggered back, the vision receding as quickly as it had come. His frills flared in distress, his pulse thundering in his veins. That was not the humans of today. That was something older, something wilder. And then, the final piece of the archive unfolded before him, a single line of text, etched in the forgotten script of the first expansion. They do not conquer, they infest. Ursek's breath caught. The humans had not changed. They had simply learned, and now they had offered the same to the Xerion. Ursek turned, his mind racing. The garden was growing. The Alliance was young, and the galaxy would never be the same far above. In the cold embrace of space, the human fleet drifted among the stars, their engines silent, and somewhere, in the dark between the stars, something stirred.